Okay, so in this lecture, what we're going to do is we're going to take what we've covered in the book and we're going to put it into practical use. Now, in the book, it talks about the three branches of government. You have the legislative, you have the judicial, and you have the executive. Well, for us, really, in the fire service, the two that we're going to be most concerned with, and really one of the two, the first is the legislative. That's where the laws are made. And then the administrative or the executive branch. The executive branch is where the administrative functions are carried out. Okay, so let's take the law, for example. We want to start a law, okay? We want to create a law. So the legislature, which is either the House or the Senate, they draft a proposal and it's called a bill. And that bill goes through both houses, the Senate and the House of Representatives. It can be the same bill or it can be a variation of the bill, and each of those two bodies of government will have some committee meetings and they'll talk about it and they'll decide, well, does the bill have validity and is it something that we really want to do? And then they'll both meet and they'll have a vote on it. And then both of those particular bills will move forward, and then they'll go to a combining committee where representatives from both the House and the Senate will combine the components of that bill together and they'll make a law. And now that law will then go forward. It actually will be a bill unapproved, and it'll go forward to either the president if we're talking about the federal government, or it'll go to the governor if we're talking about state government, and then it'll be approved and he'll sign it into legislation, and then it becomes a law. Okay, so we have this law. Let's just say that we want to create a law where we pay firefighters who have a degree, we pay them a supplemental compensation. So the Senate introduces the bill, it goes through the committees, and it gets approved. They say, hey, that's a great idea. We want our firefighters to be educated, and we want to give them a little extra if they go that step. So let's give them some compensation. We'll call it a Supplementary Compensation bill. And it gets approval and it gets voted by the Senate, it gets approved, and the House has a companion bill and they approve it, and both bills get combined and it gets moved forward to the governor, and the governor says, yes, that's a good idea. I want my firefighters to be trained and I want them to be well educated, so I'll sign it into law. And now it's a law. But the bill is very, very rough. And it says, the law is very rough. It says that we will pay firefighters supplemental compensation if they have a 2-year degree and a 4-year degree. But it really doesn't say a lot, okay? Inside that law will be direction that will appoint that authority basically to an administrative agency. And in the state of Florida, we actually have a law for supplementary compensation. It is Florida Statute 633.382. And that is the law. That is the framework that says that the state of Florida will pay supplemental compensation to firefighters that have an associate's degree, and it will pay supplemental compensation to firefighters that have a bachelor's degree. But the law is very vague and very broad. First of all, there needs to be some kind of administration over it. Who's going to take care of it? Who's going to administer it? Who's going to enforce it? So the law appoints the Division of Financial Services, which is the cabinet position that basically the fire service falls under in the state of Florida. It appoints them as the executor, or the person in charge of administering supplemental compensation. During that process, it says, okay, they will come up with the rules as to how it's paid, when it's paid, where the money comes from, how we apply the funds, and who pays to who, whether it's paid directly to the individual or paid to the employer through payroll deductions. All of that's hammered out in this process called an administrative. Now, the legislature, okay, the legislative branch makes the law, and then they pass the responsibility of administering the law to the executive branch, which is, in this particular case, the Division of Financial Services in the state of Florida. And the Division of Financial Services in the state of Florida has a branch that falls under them called the State Fire Marshal's Office. And the State Fire Marshal's Office is where the Bureau of Fire Standards and the agency that maintains or takes care of the rules for our supplemental compensation comes into play. So now we have the legislature that creates the law, and then we have the administrative agency to administer the law. So through a process called rule development, rule hearing, and rule making, the administrative agency comes up with the rules on how that supplemental compensation is going to be paid. Okay? So they say, okay, well, we have to decide what boundaries. Who is going to receive it? Are you going to get it if you have an associate's degree in complex basket weaving, or do you have to have a degree that's specific to your job? So all those things are spelled out in that administrative hearing. Now, this is where it gets kind of dicey, because administrative function, okay, almost to the point where they are actually interpreting and writing the law, So in order to provide checks and balances, because of that administrative function, the Constitution is written so that when they do administrative functions like that, they have to go through a process of public hearings. Therefore, there is oversight on what that administrative agency can do. They can't just arbitrarily say, okay, the state says we're going to pay supplemental compensation to firefighters, but we're going to turn around and say, well, for every dollar you pay the firefighter, you're going to pay me. There has to be that oversight. So that process of rule hearing has to be a public and it has to be participated in widely by some oversight. So therefore, that administrative process has its own checks and balances. So we have the legislation, which is the law, and then we have the administrative rule, which tells you how to carry out the law. And in this case, the administrative rule for supplemental compensation in the state of Florida is 69A 37085. And then there's a number of statutes below, or excuse me, a number of administrative code below that talks about the different aspects of supplemental compensation. So essentially, we have laws, then we have administrative rules that help us interpret or help us carry out those laws.